Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of The Guys Who Stared. Stats Cade Kennedy with you alongside Tyler Riggs. Week 9 of college football in the books, Tyler. Another fun week to say the absolute least. Some great matchups. You always get some big games in there, and a few things that really didn't go the way we thought they would. Going to be a lot to talk about in this one, but as always, before we get into the video fully, feel free to like the video, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment down below. When you have an odd week like this, we always love to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, just one of those weeks, Cade, where you had some big matchups on paper, and we'll see if they delivered or not as we look over here.
Absolutely. But the first game to get into, we talked about it, Tyler. We both agreed that there was a good chance Texas A&M was going to not take care of business. You can't take care of an LSU team like that until it happened. It was just one of those games where Texas A&M comes in and just struggles in the first half. I mean, cannot find their footing offensively. LSU busts a few big plays. It looks like it's going to be one of those, okay, this is the reality we're going to have to deal in. LSU is going to be that team to beat in the SEC this year. It's something that I don't think anyone expected going into the season. And then Texas A&M makes a switch at quarterback. Out goes Connor Wegman. In comes Marcel Reed. And the read option element to Texas A&M's run-first type of offense just completely changed the game. I mean, you just look at the scoring summary here. You look at the win probability chart. Anything you want to look at, Texas A&M takes over. You get the one-play drive off the turnover. A&M scores. Okay, it's a 3-point game. How do you control the momentum and get it back if you're LSU? And they just never did. Texas A&M took over after that point. Garrett Nussmeier threw 3 interceptions, went 25 for 50 passing. That is never a fun time when you're forced to just keep on chucking it and it doesn't go your way. LSU, of course, those were their only 3 turnovers of the game. But Tyler, this is a Texas A&M team that they showed me a lot from this game. This was Mike Elko. You know, I've sung his praises enough on this show. If you've been listening, you know I kept saying every week, and I know, Tyler, you have too, A&M continues to look really good. They're peaking at the right time. And now that you made that quarterback switch again, putting Reed back in not because of injury this time, but because of you needed to do it, Texas A&M looked like an incredible team.
Yeah, and I think this game was huge in 2 big cases for A&M. A, it showed that Mike Elko is willing to make the tough decisions, the quarterback switch, obviously. And B, for Marcel Reed, you know, a young man that freshman, but a lot of pressure on him, succeeded. You know, and you could say what you want about his throwing ability, but like you had mentioned a second ago, the rushing dimension he adds to this Texas A&M offense that wants to run the ball first, second, and sometimes third. I mean, hey, they produced 245 yards on the ground, 5 yards carry, 5 touchdowns, all touchdowns for A&M came on the ground game. Marcel Reed had 3 of them. That was amazing to watch. Great performance by him in a big moment at home. You got the crowd back in it. And yeah, A&M, you know, took care of business in a really tough spot. That's not easy to do when you find yourself down like that and going through the switch. And that defense, again, you know, it's scary hours when Texas A&M finally has a competent head coach that's not just collecting checks, a la Jimbo.
Absolutely.
So,
And I mean,
this team is spicy, Cade. It's spicy.
It's crazy. You talked about the passing a little bit, you know, making that change, which you had to. And, you know, you mentioned that Reed, not the best thrower, but it's crazy to look at when you look at the stats. It only took him 2 passes to overcome
Eclipse, yeah.
To be better than everything Wigman did in the entire game. 2 for 2, 70 yards, a QBR of 99.8, and then the 9 carries for 62 yards and the 3 scores you had already mentioned. Talking about rushing game on the other side, it's one of Texas A&M's strengths. You know that going into the game. LSU 35 yards on the day, 1.6 yards per carry. You make LSU one-dimensional, which, to be fair, passing is their better half anyway. But when you're able to force those turnovers, when you get Garrett Nussmeier in positions where, I don't want to say seeing ghosts, but that last interception he threw, where you're just almost chucking it straight to a lineman or a linebacker in there, just absolutely just one of the all-time what are you thinking kind of moments where I was just shocked watching him throw that, where he didn't really do that, did he? Is A&M's defense really pressuring him that much? And the answer is yes. This is the wrecking crew that Texas A&M always wants to see out there. The Aggies, like you mentioned, you get someone competent in there who knows how to handle that environment to really get Aggie land all riled up. This is a scary Texas A&M team now. First place in the SEC, Texas A&M, something that I don't think anyone would have predicted heading into November.
Well, especially, given how you start the season with that loss to Notre Dame, you don't look great. Notre Dame kind of, really controlled. And you slowly bounce back. You had that close call against Bowling Green and then one against Arkansas. It was really that Missouri game that changed the tide, right? In terms of the perception. But then you follow that with that weird performance against the Mississippi State team, who's maybe improving a little bit. I don't know how you want to couch that one, but yeah, big statement for A&M. One that really sets you up now to where you've got South Carolina, Mexico State, and Auburn before that Texas game. So you could really take this next month, essentially, because that game's on the 30th of November, to build yourself, continue to work on some of those small details against lesser opponents, and be as sharp as you can be as you welcome Texas into town.
Absolutely. It's weird to think about, but that road to Atlanta setting up extremely nice for Texas A&M in the 38-23 win over LSU. But Tyler, that's not the only Texas team we've got to talk about in our games of the week here. We got another Texas team, the Texas team, if you will, going to Vanderbilt. And, I want to give both of us credit because we both called that this would happen. Texas was an 18-point favorite coming into this game. If you listen to the preview show, we said, do not believe that. Vanderbilt's going to make this a game. And Tyler, what happened? Vanderbilt made this a game. 27-24, Texas getting the job done in a day where each side had multiple turnovers, 5 combined turnovers, but Texas had to eke out a win, which is something that is just crazy to think about. A, from how much Texas has seemingly regressed in the past few weeks, some of that you can say, well, they didn't play the best teams in the world. Michigan and Oklahoma are down this year. Who is their best win, really? And some of that I also want to look at how far Vandy's gone in just a few years, that they're able to consistently compete with some of the top dogs in the SEC now.
Yeah, and I think for both teams, you kind of touched on it with Texas. I don't know if it's so much that they've fallen. I think it's just they benefited from beating up on lesser talent, like they should have, right? The Michigan win, obviously against Mississippi State, won a good team. Oklahoma, we know the deficiencies there. And then Georgia kind of exposed you a little bit. Obviously, Quinn Ewers hasn't been as sharp as you would like him to be, maybe. Wasn't the best in this game. They started strong, but I don't want to take away from what Vanderbilt's doing, like you said, because for Texas, this is a good road win. Like, it may not seem like it because you have the perception, oh, it's Vanderbilt. No, with the way Vanderbilt's been playing, they have been a very tough SEC team to go against. And so to come out on the road, for the most part, control the game, hold off the Vanderbilt rally, I think you do got to give Texas credit for that. People probably won't want to at the end of the day, but they really did control this game pretty much, despite some of those turnovers. And I think you really got to commend them for that, considering the opponent that was.
Exactly. And that is the thing. If Texas, we can always play the if game, if you will, but Texas doesn't turn the ball over. Vanderbilt never gets those red zone opportunities to make this a ball game. But at the same time, it was one of those crazy things watching this because it felt like deja vu for a moment. This is the 3:15 SEC network game. We'll go all the way back to this. They switched it over to the main coverage on ABC after the conclusion of Missouri-Alabama, which we'll get to that game later. It started to feel like, okay, everyone could smell blood in the water. This game is tightening up. It's 24-17. Texas punts a few times, and Vanderbilt just can't get anything going. And that's credit to the Texas defense. That's not a knock anywhere else. Texas did exactly what you had to do there. Force some punts, force some turnovers, do anything you can to make sure Vandy can't sit on the ball for 8 minutes and maybe play for overtime. Or maybe, if they would have scored, who knows, maybe they go for 2 in the win. But Texas, their defense tightened up when it absolutely had to and played good for most of the day. But what concerns me with Texas going forward, and in certain games more than others, especially that Texas A&M game, is Quinn Ewers' injury. What happened to him he does not look like the same guy still. In terms of mobility, we know he has the ability to run. He's not going to kill you with it, but he has some
He's not
ability.
art.
Yeah, he has the ability to make a play or two happen and improvise a bit. And that just looked gone. It looked like he is, not a 100% statue back there, but if you put some pressure on it and he's got no one to throw to, you've got a pretty good chance of knocking him down or forcing an incompletion there, which it was confusing to me and a lot of Texas fans as well. Texas was able to get a lot of screen passes, able to spread Vandy out, and that worked a lot in the first half. Went away from it late in the game, which I didn't really understand either. If you're gashing him on 6-7 yards at a time doing that, why would you go away from that concept? But either way, Texas still getting the win. And like you mentioned, anytime you beat a top 25 team, regardless of how much of a meme they've been in the past, it doesn't matter if it's Vanderbilt or Kansas last year being in the Big 12 or whoever it is. These are always going to be important games. Don't let the name fool you. Like you said, still a big deal.
It is, but I do think that point you made about Ewers is an interesting one because you've got two opponents now for Texas coming up in Florida and Arkansas, who at times, could say, hey, we're going to crank up the pressure like Vandy did and just see if Quinn can handle it. That's going to be interesting to watch because those two teams, while they've had their ups and downs, are still ones that have proven, okay, they could play some competent football when they're up to it. So I'm curious to see how the next couple of weeks goes for Texas. They've got the bye week this week to kind of regroup, and then going forward, you enter that last stretch.
Absolutely. And it's going to be an interesting race down the line. I mean, and you could say that for nearly every team we talk about here, but what Texas is going to have to do to continue to hope that someone doesn't, like you mentioned, Florida and Arkansas, teams that can jump up, punch you in the mouth, we're still going to need a little bit more progress for Texas. There's a reason why they jumped from moved down from 5 to 6. You wouldn't think that's a big movement. It really isn't. It's only one spot. But now that narrative is going to start to roll a little bit that, okay, maybe this isn't the Texas team we thought they were. And Texas is going to have to fight against that now for a week or two, which will be interesting to see how that plays out. But Tyler, the next game to get to, leaving the SEC now, going over to the Big Ten. Another one on the list that I've got here, Oregon and Illinois. This one is not surprising that Oregon won. I don't think anyone would be shocked to tell you that Oregon won this game. But I think it was more the way they did it. 38-9 in a game that wasn't even that close. Oregon's up 35-3 at halftime. Illinois had their chances to make this a game in the second half, and nearly every single time the Ducks were able to show up defensively and respond, force a turnover on downs, pick off Luke Altmaier twice, which, Altmaier, a guy that does not make those kinds of mistakes often. Oregon was able to capitalize. Their defense stood up. Their offense played phenomenal, just bulldozing over a stout Illini defense. Tyler, this was one of those crazy games that, we've talked about every single test Oregon has had. They've passed with flying colors, and this was no different here.
Yeah, especially, since that Ohio State win, you could tell that was a huge relief, right? In the last 2 weeks, they've almost played free, more free than what we've seen compared to, I would say, that stretch before the Ohio State game against Oregon State and UCLA. Those two road trips, they really took care of business. And, for Oregon, they've earned the number one spot. What else can I say? This is a team that hasn't fired on all cylinders. Dylan Gabriel, even in his okay days, is still pretty much, one of the best quarterbacks in the country right now in terms of efficiency. So they've got it going, and their schedule the rest of the way ain't bad. You've got two good road tests in Michigan and Wisconsin, but they get Maryland and Washington at home. So the hard part for them is over. Now it will be interesting to see is can they keep that focus, stay sharp, because the path for them to await an opponent, if you will, for that Big Ten championship is free at this point. I mean, as long as they don't slack off, they should be, waiting in Ohio State again, or maybe in Indiana or Penn State. We'll see.
Absolutely. And I mean, this is the Oregon team that it's hard trying to find something they did wrong. Even in a game like this where you can look at, hey, you didn't score in the third quarter. You got outscored in the second half 6-3. They had their starters in there. They weren't going through the motions necessarily, but there's not really having to take their foot off the gas. But if they wanted to, they could have, but they didn't. Like I said, that defense staying strong, just locking Illinois down, only 132 yards on the ground, 4 yards a carry. Still an okay day for Illinois. But Oregon just barreling over people. Jordan James, 83 yards on the ground. Dylan Gabriel, 291 through the air. Also got that rushing touchdown as well. And this Oregon receiving core is just so fun to watch. Gabriel, when he gets in a rhythm, it's still fun to see. I mean, we both got to see it firsthand at Oklahoma last year, obviously. But just when that flow gets going, it is insanely hard to stop. And Illinois just could not get Oregon out of rhythm enough. And when they get going, they get going. I mean, it turns into 14, 21, 28 in a hurry.
Yeah, it does. And, if you want to talk about Gabriel and his efficiency in the flow, again, you look at the stat line 18 26, 291, 3 touchdowns a pick. You think, that's a good day, maybe not the best. Still had a QBR of almost 96. Telling you how efficient he was truly in a game that wasn't necessarily his best on the season. So this offense, especially, I think, is on another level right now. And you factor in that tough defense, they've got the number one team.
They do right now. But let's go from talking about good offense in the Big Ten to an old-fashioned Big Ten style stalemate. Ohio State escaping. Now, not a word I thought I'd be saying this week to describe Ohio State, but escaping with a 21-17 win over Nebraska. This was a game that, Tyler, we didn't even have on the board because, Ohio State was favored by over 20. This felt like a game that was, 25.5 was the line in this one for Ohio State. And Nebraska comes out and I don't want to say bullies Ohio State for a little bit, but you look at that time of possession, 35-25. Neither team got over 300 yards of offense. You didn't get over 290 either. And Tyler, we talk about this a lot too. The games where, it's back and forth, but you don't feel that Ohio State's going to, lose this game. They're not going to give it away. That didn't happen here. Nebraska had a lead in the fourth quarter, got stopped on the 4th and goal from the 1 in the third quarter where they could have taken the lead there. Ohio State, a lot of just sloppy play from them in this game, a lot of uncharacteristic things. Where Nebraska, they have a good defensive line. They were able to play up to the Nebraska of old level on certain plays there where Nebraska just hung around, and Ohio State, I don't know if they were looking ahead to the Penn State game necessarily. I'm sure that's not what the players would tell you, definitely. But Ohio State, I don't know what exactly is the best word to use for it, but lackadaisical at times. This did not look like the Ohio State we've seen this year.
No, and not to excuse it in terms of the performance, but we're talking about college kids still. Yes, some are a little older than others. Looking at you, Alan Bowman, but it's still a situation where no matter what teams will tell you, no matter what head coach will tell you, every Ohio State player saw Indiana absolutely dismantle Nebraska the week before, right? Maybe not live, but they went back and watched it, saw them get dismantled. So I don't even think it's a case of Ohio State overlooking Nebraska and looking ahead to Penn State. I think it's a case of Ohio State watches the film, says, this Nebraska team isn't really that good. We should be able to come out, with a B-plus effort, be fine. Obviously, college football in general, and nowadays especially with more parity because of the transfer portal, we know you can't do that. And they almost found out. So, it wasn't even a great performance by Nebraska's offense, as you alluded to. Not a great game offensively either side. Will Howard was interesting in this one, but I mean, for Ohio State, you escape with the win. You breathe that sigh of relief. Now you better get geared up for that Penn State game, and we'll talk about that a little bit down the road. But you better turn around quick because this Big Ten race is still very much on. Of course, you got Indiana, you got Penn State coming up, and you got Oregon sitting on top. So Ohio State better get together. And for Nebraska, hey, applause for especially on the defensive side to bounce back like they did this week after that just absolute thrashing that Indiana gave you. So kudos to them. Tough to see them lose another top 25, potential win, if you will, but that's how it goes sometimes.
Yeah, well, you say that's how it goes sometimes. That's how it feels it goes for Nebraska every time now. I mean,
they're on a little bit of a streak.
How many times can you go through the ringer of it's a close game, down the stretch, you have opportunities, you either get an opportunity handed to you and don't capitalize, or you just fail to convert on your own and the other team wins a one possession game. How many times have we seen this happen in Nebraska now? And how many more times are Husker fans going to have to keep going through this? I mean, it's a never ending cycle, it feels like, Tyler.
And it's spanned different coaches to this point, so you almost feel like it's a curse somewhere on the school, right? What has befallen Nebraska to deserve this?
Yeah, what corn do they need to sacrifice to get back to their winning ways, Tyler? I mean, what do they got to do out here? But for Ohio State, kind of looking at them, I don't want to say this provides necessarily the blueprint to beat Ohio State, but you look at the rushing game. 29 yards for Quinshawn Judkins. Trevion Henderson only had 25 yards. 2.1 yards per carry for Ohio State, only 64 on the ground the entire day. I mean, just nothing doing there. You force Will Howard to have to make the plays. Now, granted, Will Howard has the ability to beat you with his arm. He has the ability to make some of those fantastic plays. But at the same time, he can just as easily throw a bad pick, make a mistake, slide down when he shouldn't. He's made mistakes before this year, and he's going to make them again, like you said earlier. These are college kids we're talking about. But still,
Yeah.
if you can force him into a tight situation, that's how you beat Ohio State. You make him deal with pressure. And if you can do that, Ohio State might be beatable next week, or this week, I should say.
Yeah, they might be, and also on Nebraska, 25 straight games they've lost to top 25 teams. By the way, back
Yeah.
to 2016. Matt Rule now 2-20 all time against top 25 teams. Match made in heaven, some would say. But anyways, yeah, I hate to say this about Will Howard, but he does seem like the real weakness of Ohio State so far, and he's a guy that just went 13-16 in this game, and 3 touchdowns, only 1 pick. He's been solid for the most part when you look at his stats on paper, but there's moments in the game, like you point out, where it's just, okay, everybody knows, well, Howard's got to make this play, and there's going to be a time when he doesn't. And that's probably the biggest saying for Ohio State that gives, fans some heartache, some heartburn, some stress and anxiety. They're going, I don't know if we can trust this guy 100%. And I think that's deserved, as much as I hate to say that.
Tyler, you could say he went from being a wildcat to a wild card, if you will. But that's a story for another day when we talk about the Ohio State-Penn State preview that will come out later on in the week. Final game of, not game of interest, top game of the week to get to. A bit of Friday night football, a little bit of the Group of Five. I don't want to say Group of Five championship because there is the American Conference. They do exist. They have good teams as well. But the Mountain West seemingly felt like it was on the line in this one. Boise State going down to Vegas to play UNLV. And Tyler, we've got to talk about it. Ashton Jeanty had a horrible game. He only had 128 yards. Absolutely disgraceful on 33 carries. I mean, we've talked about it the entire year. We're going to keep talking about it. It's incredible that you can have a guy like that just a bad game for him is still over 125 and a touchdown. I mean, this is a game where both teams kind of, don't want to say slogged around. It was a lot more defense than I think people expected. But Boise State, when push came to shove, was able to sit on the ball in the fourth quarter. Their defense clutched up, and that's how they got the win. They used the big second quarter to propel them to victory and just locking down UNLV in the fourth quarter. And sometimes the best offense is a good defense. I'll spin it around. When you're able to sit on the ball for 6, 7, 8 minutes there to end the game, that helps a lot.
Yeah, it does. And, credit to both defenses, because I think they heard the talk all week, right? If you looked at the national scene, I think the over-under for this game was somewhere in the 60s. So people were expecting 30-plus points, probably, close to on each side. And heck, I said it last week, it's like, man, UNLV might let Ashton Jeanty go for 300 yards in this game because they just hadn't looked great. Boise State's defense has been suspect at times, so credit to both those Ds for at least, kind of bowing up a bit. And I think the unsung hero of this game is Max Matson, Boise State quarterback, a guy that's kind of been overlooked this year simply because Ashton Jeanty's been the big story, rightfully so. But Cade, when you got a very talented running back in that backfield, it takes pressure off of you as a quarterback, and you have to answer to that and come up clutch when you're needed, right? You don't have to do a lot, but you got to be able to do what's needed. I mean, he's done that so far this season. Just a sophomore, beat out Malachi Nelson for that starting job, which was kind of a surprise, right? And he's only thrown 2 interceptions all season to 13 touchdowns. So he's been efficient. He's done what's needed, and he's not losing you games, right? He's letting the defense get it done when they've had chances. He's letting Genty do his thing. And I think that's an underrated part of this Boise State team.
Absolutely. And I mean, the other thing to talk about, you mentioned, when you're a quarterback and you have a phenomenal running back like you do in Genty, it takes a lot of pressure off you. It also helps when you have the ability to put the wheels on yourself and go on a 49-yard run. If you would have
Yeah.
if you would have given me the stat line of 3 carries, 58 yards, and a touchdown, and said, Cade, is this going to be Maddox Madsen's stat line rushing for the entire game, or Aston Genty after insert drive here? I would have said, oh yeah, Genty breaks off a big run. I'm sure that'll happen at some point. No, his longest was 16. UNLV, I mean, I think the stat line everyone saw when you're flipping through Yankees, Dodgers. Oh, what's going on in that Boise State UNLV game? And you see Ashton Genty, 2 carries, negative yards. And you're going, what? Excuse me? That's illegal, I think. Like, what are we doing here? It's just incredible that UNLV played such good defense on him. And yet, at the end of the day, like you said, it was Madsen stepping up. It was the receiving core making catches when they absolutely had to. And it was the Bronco defense, the unsung heroes, if you will, that don't get a whole lot of credit. That was how Boise State won this game, staying undefeated in the Mountain West. And now, I don't want to say it's cruise control for them because it is the Mountain West after all. Weird things happen in that conference. But Boise State, they have the leadway, I would say, to be that number 12 spot in the college football playoff.
Yeah, and what's intriguing about that is that they're going to have, as long as they finish out strong, right, against not a subpar Mountain West conference, because you never know, but if they go take care of business, the remaining games, even against an undefeated Army team, right, they're going to have a really strong case to get in over them because their only loss was to Oregon, and they took Oregon to the limit with how dominant Oregon's starting to look. I don't know who can unseat Boise right now. So if they go take care of business, they might very well just punch themselves into the playoffs without really much argument.
Yeah, so I think the only way at this rate, if Boise goes 11-1 and then 12-1 with the Mountain West title, I think the only way they wouldn't make the playoff in that scenario if Army goes undefeated, which would mean they would have to beat Notre Dame. That's
Right.
the only thing I think that could stop them at this
But
point.
even then, that's a Notre Dame team that has lost to an NIU. And I know,
Yeah.
We'll get to it when it comes to the, Notre Dame Navy game here in a minute. But who has Notre Dame really beat other than that? So if Army's best case is, well, hey, we beat Notre Dame, but Notre Dame's best win was over Navy.
But you could say
I mean,
Texas
what are we
A&M
talking about?
for Notre Dame. You could say that.
Oh,
But
duh! I forget about A&M.
well,
Thank you.
we'll get
Thank you.
to
Slap me around.
A&M
Slap me
when we
around.
get to them. I've got my
Slap
own.
me around
No,
there.
I've got my
Jeez.
own thing about Texas A&M later on in the show, but when we get to the power ranking stuff. But
See,
Tyler,
that's what a loss to NIU does. It just wipes away any sort of win that you
yeah,
had, especially
one
against A&M.
devastating loss is equal to one quality win, is what you're saying. That's the 1-to-1 exchange. But by the way,
Yes.
the Northern Illinois team is 4-4 and is a middle of the pack MAC team. So
Yeah.
that's your group of 5 update from the MAC, because unfortunately there's nothing else to talk about until next week when MACtion really gets into high gear. But that's enough about MACtion on this
Max so
Mountain
tough.
West segment.
They always cannibalize themselves. That's the problem. They're so
Yeah.
tough. They always cannibalize
Yeah,
themselves.
unlike the Mountain West right now, Boise State looking good, the 29-24 win over UNLV. But Tyler, it is time to get to Champions of Life of the Week. And what better team to talk about for Champions of Life of the Week than a 3-5 Tulsa team that I can't believe I get to say they're 3-5, because you look at the score and say, okay, 46-45, they beat UTSA. Wow, that was a fun game. Well, it wasn't, because this win probability chart might be the steepest cliff I've ever seen on ESPN's website. Can we find it? 99.4% chance. There it is. 99.9% chance of victory for UTSA with 5 minutes to go in the game when they had a 45-32 lead. UTSA blows a 28-point lead in the second half. not to lose to Tulsa in a game where Tulsa has a backup quarterback and Cooper Leggis come into the game and throw for 333, 5 touchdowns, run for 46 yards, a game that should never have been close, a game that wasn't close until Tulsa just started fighting back and you get a little bit of momentum and you start feeling good about the game and you start to get that belief that you can do this. And when the other team just sits and does nothing or appears to sit and do nothing, you get all that confidence, all that momentum, everything fueling into you, and you get a crazy comeback like this. That is why Tulsa, for me, is the champion of life of the week for games on Saturday, because we've got another one to talk about, Tyler. The other winner of the week, champion of life, not of the week. This might be champion of life of the year, Tyler. Kennesaw State beating Liberty.
Baby. The seesaw, Kennesaw,
As you like to call them, Kennesaw State. The Owls beating Liberty to get not only their first win this year, their first win is an FBS program. This is the team that had the worst rating in NCAA 25, and that was all anyone knew about them coming into this season. They were the 71 overall team that everyone tried to do this is the toughest rebuild in the game. That was all anyone knew about them. And here they are, not just beating Liberty, but just controlling the game at times for a little bit, Tyler, which I don't think anyone really expected. They win time of possession. They win the turnover battle. This was a team that the week before scored 5 points. Yes, 5 points against Middle Tennessee State. The Owls had no business being competitive in this game. Most people thought Liberty was a 27.5-point favorite, and they only scored 24. They're the only 8,000 people were at this game because they played at Tiny.
It was hilarious, and it also absolutely.
Oh, I think we had you there for a moment. There you go.
Yeah, there we go. But anyways, as I was saying, go ahead.
But I was going to finish my point that this is a stadium that I think is not more famous for Kennesaw State football, but for Atlanta United plays some of their games here when their big stadium of Mercedes-Benz is full or occupied, or they want to play a random game where the backups play here. That's what most people think of when they think of First Third Stadium. Now they got to think about Kennesaw State football because the Owls have a win.
They do, and for a lot of people, like you mentioned, this is shocking, right? Hilarious because absolutely Liberty. All you had to do was just win. I mean, you don't play a tough schedule, and you get beat by arguably the worst team on your schedule. I mean, you're out of the race, right, for the group of 5. But I do want to make this point for those that don't know on Kennesaw State. This program only started football-wise in 2017.
Exactly,
and they've risen through the ranks. Brian Bohannon, the coach, has been there every step of the way. So this is the guy that has seen them rise, been part of that rise over the last decade nearly, and they began playing in 2015, so nearly a decade, and a team that rose through the FCS level to get to this point. And you betcha he believed they could get it done because that's what they've been doing. He's got a 72-36 career record. That doesn't sound like crazy, but to start a program from scratch, Cade, we know how tough that could be, and to be pretty much a winner up until you get to the FBS, right? And then you're entering that final kind of new level. That's really impressive. That is really impressive with what he's been able to do, and big kudos to them. And hey, maybe in a couple of years they could be one of those group of 5 powerhouses. Who knows?
Maybe. I mean, anyone in the Conference USA, you could convince me could be really good in 5 years, and I'd believe it. That's just the nature of that conference. It's a revolving door. For a while, it seems like it might be Liberty and whoever challenges them. But I also, give credit to Davis Bryson. You can see him there, 16 for 20, 189 and a TD. The QBR only says 63.8. Give him an extra plus 30 bonus for first win in school history. I don't care. Just absolutely phenomenal for Kennesaw State. But I know, Tyler, you've got your own winners of the champions of life of the week to get to. I'm going to keep calling them both. Winners of the week, champions of life of the week, whatever you want to call them works for me.
Well, I think the first one I got to mention, this is all the way back on Thursday night, so you got to go back a little bit. But how about that Pittsburgh defense just putting Colin McCord at an absolute point of anguish and agony? 5 interceptions. 5 interceptions. McCord's leading receiver, if we counted all players, would have been a Pittsburgh defensive back. I mean, it was an absolutely stellar effort defensively for the Panthers. Offensively, obviously didn't have to really do anything. I mean, Holstein, actually, I should say, he produced when he needed to. But man, what a dismantling of Syracuse that was by Pittsburgh. Big win for them. Keeps them undefeated going into a sneaky, actually big time matchup with SMU next week, which I'm sure we'll get to on the preview. But that's a huge one, right? So champions of life for Pittsburgh this week, still probably unsung a little bit. And then nobody believed him. Nobody did, Cade, except me. I was on the show. I believed him. BYU, the Cougs, going down and getting the dub over Central Florida. Held off RJ Harvey just enough, able to slow him up enough for BYU to control that game, get the win. Vegas didn't believe. You didn't believe, Cade, but I believed in the Cougs.
I don't think anyone believed him. I mean, Josh Pate didn't believe in him. I saw he had a sign on his show already that said, "I'm sorry, BYU." I mean, it was just one of those weeks where, and it's crazy to think about because this is the stat of the day, kind of more on the UCF side. They're favored again this week against Arizona. 8 of the 9
They
games.
just fired their defensive coordinator, Ted Roof. He's gone.
They did. And UCF is favored in that game. That's the space game for them. The big deal there. UCF will be now favored in 8 of the 9 games they have played this season, and they're 3-5 going into that. So it has not gone well for UCF, to say the absolute slightest. But credit to BYU. I mean, they were a team that I felt, okay, this is that classic fall-off week someone's going to have. It felt like it was going to be BYU. Coming off that big win, emotional win over Oklahoma State, and credit to them. Cougars just played phenomenal ball. Came in, shut UCF down as well as you can, holding RJ Harvey to 127 and 2 touchdowns. This is about as good of a job as you're going to do. But Ja'Cory Brown did not look great at all. 96 yards, 2 interceptions. Having to switch quarterbacks again was UCF. Credit to BYU. That's all I could say. Tip your hat to them. Played a lot better than I thought they would. You're a front runner in the Big 12, and you played like it. That's all I could say. But Tyler, it is time to move on to Fraud Alert. And the first team we got to talk about in Fraud Alert is Liberty. We're going right back to Liberty. I mean, you have to. I mean, it's just 5-0. You coming into this game, you have the outside hope that maybe some teams implode and you can sneak in and get that playoff spot. That's all you're praying for at this point. And Kennesaw State came in and just absolutely ruined that. And I mean, if you're Liberty, I mean, I don't want to say this is like a program-breaking loss or anything like that, but it might be a season-breaking loss because what are your goals now? Your main goal is gone. You can still win the conference, and that's still a thing to be proud of. But, if you're Liberty, you're going to look at it and go, okay, we went 11-1, won our conference, and we get nothing from it. Last year, you at least got to get smashed in a Fiesta Bowl. But this is a Liberty program that seems like it's going to be that rotating door for a while. Where it's just coaches come in, they win, and then they leave, and a new guy comes in, and, can they finally get someone that can take them to the next level?
Well, and you would think with the groundwork they've done the last couple of years, you're in prime position to be able to say, hey, we are that group of 5 teams, especially in the Conference USA, where you've got, again, you talk about revolving doors. This conference has been revolving doors for seemingly the last couple of decades with all the realignment. So, but then all of a sudden you look around, okay, Western Kentucky's, risen up in conference play. Jacksonville State's good there. Sam Houston's been tough. And Liberty has lost their grasp very quickly on Conference USA at a time where you get the expanded playoff and you have every chance to really assert yourself as one of the premier, hey, we've got, some of the best group of 5, brand available right there with Liberty, and you fumble it. I mean, whatever happens the rest of the season, even if you go dominate, like I said, what goals are ahead of you? Win the conference, get into a bowl game, okay, no shot of the college football playoff at this point.
Yeah, it's absolutely done. And I don't want to say start looking to next year because that's always kind of sad to say, you're 5-1, look to next year.
You're 5-1, yeah. Look to next year.
Exactly. You don't want to say that, but like you mentioned, who's going to be that next program coming down the track that is the team that takes out Liberty? Is it going to be Western Kentucky? Is it going to be a Sam Houston? Is it going to be a Jacksonville State? Someone is eventually going to pass them, and you're going to look back to games like this and go, man, how did we not go undefeated? How did we lose to them? This was our prime window. These are the golden years of your program where you're trying to really show to everyone, hey, we're all alone by ourselves on a weird Tuesday night game. If someone's really wanting to watch college football, they're watching us play, and they're watching us lose a game we were 27.5-point favorites in. Notre Dame wasn't even favored by that much to beat Northern Illinois. I mean, this is just a giant spread that you couldn't cover. You couldn't even score the amount of points you were favored to win by. I mean, what else can I say, Tyler? Just absolutely major fraud alert for Liberty. And the other team I want to get to, and I hate doing this.
Hold on. I got Paul Liberty one more time.
Okay,
got to bring in the
one
final
more.
elbow.
Okay.
Also, fraud alert, Cade and Salter. He had legit hype coming into the season as, hey, this could be a sneaky, quarterback in this draft class, because obviously you got Shadur and then you got some other question marks around that. Like, Salter could emerge as one of those big time guys, right? No, he has been shockingly kind of middle of the road this season. I don't want to say full on mid, but he hasn't been what you would expect from a guy that had that type of hype. It's been okay, but I think that's also reflected in Liberty, where they just have been okay at best.
There you go. That might be the best phrase to describe them. Okay at best. And unfortunately, Tyler, I don't want to say that about our next team for fraud alert that I've got here, but we got to talk about Navy. Navy losing to Notre Dame. It's not just that they lost. It's that they lost 51-14. Had 6 turnovers. Just absolutely could not find any footing. It was one of those, the game was over by the middle of the second quarter. Once Notre Dame responded back, Blake Horvath finally gets a 47-yard run. You're thinking, okay, 14-7, here we go. It's a game. This is going to be fun. Notre Dame responds in 3 plays on a 64-yard run, and it just never got anywhere close for Navy. They just, every time they had a position to maybe do something, not even talking about score, just, get a couple of first downs, put a drive together. There's a turnover, or Notre Dame's defense stepped up. And credit to Notre Dame. They came into this game going, hey, top 25 opponent. We know they're going to want to run the ball. We're going to shut this thing down. We're going to force them to have to throw it at some point. We're going to force them to, we're going to try to strip the ball away from them. We're going to see what happens there. And Navy just played uncharacteristic to their credit. And when you have 6 turnovers, yeah, I can give, 1 or 2, maybe even a third. But 6, that's going to be enough to put you on fraud alert, Tyler.
It is. And for Notre Dame, I mean, part of this is they out-Navied Navy, right?
They
Dominated
did.
in the trenches, ran for nearly 270 yards, over 6 yards a carry, took care of the ball, no turnovers. Riley Leonard wasn't amazing throwing the ball, but he didn't need to be. He was great on the ground. Jeremiah Love was fantastic. They had Kendron Young also getting in there towards the end as well. I mean, so hey, Notre Dame, credit to them. For Navy, I mean, it's tough. You hate to see it because, we love that storyline, but when you commit those turnovers in the biggest game of the season for you to this point, just inexcusable, It's one of those deals where you wish you could have seen a game where if Navy didn't turn the ball over, because obviously with the offense they run, their style, you can't have those type of mistakes and expect to compete.
Absolutely. I mean, it was just one of those games that I was excited to see how it was going to go. Trying to go back and forth between that and some of the other games I was watching. And the first time I turned over, Navy fumbles. I'm thinking, okay, well, Notre Dame just got the ball, 7-yard drive, it's 14-0. And in my mind, I was looking at it like, I don't want to say that's game already because that feels way too early to call. But it basically was. I mean, Navy got their one big play in the first half, and that was it. Navy struck again, but it was 31-14. It was too late by that point. But Tyler, there's, I believe, one game you wanted to talk about. Similar issue of turnovers, but from the different side of things for fraud alert.
Yeah, it was, Cade. The SMU Duke game. I mean, okay, 6 turnovers, right? We saw what Notre Dame could do when you hand them 6 turnovers.
Yes.
Cade, do we want to talk about what Duke did with 6 SMU turnovers?
I don't think
They
Duke,
did absolutely nothing.
I was saying, I don't think
They,
Duke fans want to talk about what Duke did, but I'm sure SMU
oh
fans
my
will be
gosh.
maybe, I don't know. I don't even think SMU fans are even okay with this. This was just the most
No.
painful fourth quarter, second half, hodgepodge, whatever you want to call this. And I almost thought about putting this on upset alert because the RJ Maryland being out the rest of the season, going to Duke, who is a stingy defense. I kind of wanted to see how that game went, but I thought, no, I'm not going to pull the trigger on. I think SMU will still find a way to win. They technically did, but I don't think either fan base is going to be happy with a game like this. I don't think.
Oh my
I mean, it's
gosh.
just brutal.
Brutal. I mean, it was stressful just keeping up with this game because 3 picks, right, for Kevin Jennings. You lose 3 fumbles. You put 6 on the ground. You lost 3 of them, and you still win the game. Oh my goodness, that doesn't happen in video games, Cade. Doesn't happen in video games. It just, oh, what a heartbreaker for Duke. I mean, that was one where had a chance to keep yourself right in the ACC race, towards the late middle part of the season with the Miami game coming up next or this week, I should say. Yeah, it would have been a tough road test, but you still would have at least had a chance to say, oh, hey, we kind of control our destiny, right? Because you would have beat SMU, knocked them from the L's, and then beaten. They could have stared down Miami, but man, I mean, how do you not get any points off one of those 6 turnovers? That's fraudulent to the nth
Absolutely.
degree.
And I mean, and it was incredible watching this in real time because I mean, you get okay, Duke hooks a 30-yard field goal, and everyone's just kind of like, oh, it's this kind of game. It's SMU gives Duke the game, and Duke refuses to take it, and then Duke gets set up again perfectly, field goal to win the game, and it gets blocked. And then you go to overtime, you score immediately, and then they go for 2, which at that point I kind of get you don't trust your kicker at all because it's a mental thing at that point. When you miss
Right.
one and then you see another one get blocked, you're in
Ugh.
overtime anyway. We're one play away from winning this thing. And then you just have a 2-point try that goes absolutely nowhere. And it's just SMU wins. Gutsy win for SMU because their defense and special teams held on for dear life. Their offense did not, but their defense and special teams did. But my goodness,
If I'm on the defense, me and the offense are having a serious
I
conversation
mean, this
after a game
was
like
this
this.
is a
This is a hey, you owe us.
yeah, this is a double fraud alert basically. SMU's offense and Duke as a team. Just my goodness, embarrassing all around. It was a fun sloppy game, but it's one of those. It's fun as an outsider, but man, if you're a fan of either of these two,
Oh,
I feel bad for you this week. I mean, just absolutely
imagine.
brutal. But Tyler, time to get on to the Power Five. The Power Five is what it used to be, but now it's the Power Four in the Group of Five. Got to get in those rankings. AP poll on the screen. But for the top 5 teams I've got, starting with the Power Four, Oregon, no surprise there. Number 1 last week, going to stay number 1. Georgia, the impressive win over Texas the week before, had a bye this week. Getting ready for Florida, going to be fun to see. They stay at 2. Penn State, no Drew Aller for the second half of that game and a little bit of the second quarter. At Wisconsin, still found a way to find a way to win by 15. Now I can't talk. This is not good. But Penn State stays at 3. Ohio State, I'm going to keep them at 4 for now. Obviously, they'll play Penn State. That's going to determine a lot about how things look next week. Ohio State still won, very ugly. But hey, you found a way to win. You did not embarrass yourself. And then we get to number 5. And Tyler, this was the big kind of contentious spot last week, at least for me, where I didn't know if I wanted to put Texas, Tennessee, LSU. There were a lot of contenders for that 5 spot. But I think I found the team. It's not Miami still. I'm still not high on Miami. Texas won, but didn't look great doing it. Had several chances to really put it away, never did. Tennessee on a bye, didn't do anything. Notre Dame had an impressive win. BYU looked good, but the team that looks the best to me to put in that 5 spot is Texas A&M. That's who gets the number 5 spot in my top 5 power rankings for the week. And there's a reason for that. This is an A&M team that's clicking at the right time. They're looking impressive right now. Marcel Reed at quarterback, they look fantastic. Now, Texas A&M with Connor Wigman, not top 5, maybe not top 10, maybe somewhere in that 15-ish range. But with Marcel Reed and Tyler right now, I think if A&M were to play Notre Dame again, I think they beat them with Reed as their quarterback. I think Texas A&M looks like the real deal right now. That's why they're number 5 in my spot.
You know, Cade, I actually like that Texas A&M number 5 spot. For I have Oregon and Georgia.
Yeah.
Number 1, number 2. We'll give, for now, Penn State number 3.
Yeah.
Just throughout injury could be big. We'll see how that plays. We'll let them stay 3. Number 4, get out of the way, Ohio State. Get out of the way, Miami. I don't want Texas. I don't want Tennessee. I don't want Notre Dame. Give me the Cougs. Nobody believed. I believe. BYU, number 4. Respect the Big 12, please.
No,
And
it's
then
not happening.
for number 5, we're actually in agreement. I like Texas A&M. I was going to put them there as well because for all the points you said, this Texas A&M team, I think, is some scary hours if they continue on. So I go Oregon, Georgia, Penn State, BYU, hashtag respect the Big 12, hashtag respect the Cougs, and give me Texas A&M also.
Yeah, and then Indiana, honorable mention. They deserve to be somewhere.
Oh yeah,
in that list.
They've got to beat a better opponent first. They've done what you've asked them to, right? Like that, they haven't done anything to not deserve it, but at the same time, you've got to beat a good opponent. Unfortunately for them, you won't really see one until Ohio State, arguably. Now, we could compare and say, hey, they made Nebraska look like a joke, whereas
they did.
Ohio State struggled. But we'll give Ohio State a little bit of the benefit of the doubt. That's also why I kicked them out of the top 5 because, well, Indiana looked better. So we'll see where Ohio State turns in this upcoming week.
Absolutely. And it'll be interesting, and I just want to, this is something I touched on in the AP reaction video that came out Sunday. And I've seen a lot of Indiana fans kind of not griping about it, but just trying to find, hey, why are we still number 13? And that's the reason why. You can't, you can kind of control your schedule a little bit in terms of non-con and things, but you just got to keep winning. It sucks to say, to say, hey, sorry, we can't boot you over a Clemson or a Texas A&M or a Notre Dame or someone that has one loss in front of you. Or you could say, hey, I think we'd go toe-to-toe with them. And I think they could. There's several teams that Indiana, I'm not going to say, they're 100% better than, but I think they can go toe-to-toe and maybe beat some of them. It's just you got to find the ways to just keep winning. Like you said, winning cures all. That gets you up in the standings. You'll have your time where everyone will get that big opportunity to respect you. But Tyler, looking at the top 3 group of 5 teams, I think we're going to stay pretty similar in our 1 and 2. Boise State, the Fighting Ashta-Genties, just continuing to look well. We talked about it a little bit earlier. Still, your only loss is 3 points at the number 1 team in the country. Impressive to say the absolute least. Number 2, I have Army, still a super efficient team. Had a bye week, so they're still 7-0. They're absolutely just chilling where they're at. Number 3 is where things get interesting. UNLV lost. Navy got blown out. Who gets that number 3 spot? Do I rotate it back to a UNLV team that now has 2 losses? Do I keep Navy there and say, hey, they lost to Notre Dame? Well, clearly I'm not going to. I put them on fraud alert in this segment for a reason. I'm going to go with Tulane at number 3. Yes, they have 2 losses, but I believe they have the better loss than Memphis. Memphis also lost to Navy, by the way. And Tulane stayed competitive in their 2 losses, unlike Navy. They're number 26 in total efficiency, not just a group of 5 teams, but of everybody. And young quarterback Darian Mensah just continuing to light it up. It's a fun Tulane team to watch. I like the Green Wave. Even though they're 5-2, they get that big showdown with Navy later on. They're still undefeated in conference play and could be making some noise, Tyler.
Yeah, I like it. I think the top 2 we're definitely in agreement on. Boise State's really, I think at this point, it's got a large gap unless they just really collapse, right? Army, definitely there. Now, for number 3, Cade, this one's a little bit of a sicko's take. Just because of all the craziness that happened this past weekend. My thing with Tulane, all right, do they have a win over a Power 5 team?
I mean, they have
No,
two
they don't.
close losses, so that counts for me as
Two
nearly
close
a
losses.
win.
One of those schools we found out not very good.
Unfortunately,
So for
yes.
me, yes, yes. But you know who does have a win on the road, no less, against a Power 5 team? Now, here's the only caveat to this, is that this team I'm about to say did lose to Tulane, third game of the season, lost in a tight one,
Yeah.
41-33. But for the absolute sickos pick that I know probably will outstand more than this week, give me number 3 for the group of 5 to be the Louisiana Raging Cajuns, sitting at
Okay.
6-1 in the Sun Belt,
Okay.
3-0, only undefeated team in conference play. Should they continue to run the gauntlet in the Sun Belt, should chaos happen, I think they would have a stronger case than a Liberty and probably not an Army Navy, but we'll see. Just give me Louisiana.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be interesting to say the absolute least how that pans out. The Sun Belt kind of feels like it went away. You know, we talked about James Madison a little bit earlier on a few weeks ago that, hey, they could be maybe one of those teams. Then it turned into, you know, you're going with Louisiana now. And to kind of add some context to this, you can look at the AP poll here, obviously, in front of you and go, well, Washington State's number 22. They technically could count for this. But them and Oregon State, I feel like go in the same group of Notre Dame where you almost treat them more as an independent. You know, as much fun as it is to talk about the Pac-2 and things like that, I think you got to treat them more like an independent. That's why I don't have them. Otherwise, they would be in the number 3 spot if they counted in that rule. But for me, they do not. And then, Tyler, you look at the Heisman top 3. I don't think it's really changed for me this week. I think it's still Ashton Jeanty, 33 carries for 128 and a touchdown, had 3 catches, 11 yards in the win over UNLV. Dylan Gabriel, still at number 2 in my opinion. He's earned that leadway with that big win against Ohio State. You follow it up, you get another good win against a solid Illinois team. 18 for 26, 291 through the air, 3 touchdowns, had a rushing TD as well. And then number 3, and this is where things get a little contentious, I'm going to stay with Cam Ward for now, but Travis Hunter is really close. Ward only 22 for 35, 208, no touchdowns to speak of whatsoever against a horrific 1-7 Florida State team, which that could be its own video if we really wanted to go into that. And then number 4, I'll throw Hunter in as a bonus. He's almost at 3.5, if you will. Some of that is just because he was injured beforehand. Coming back, though, this week, big game against Cincy. 9 catches for 153, 2 touchdowns, had 4 broken up passes and 2 tackles as well. Hunter, still a phenomenal player.
I like those. I'm going to go with a little bit interesting kind of antidote here.
Okay.
I'm going to just have 2 Heisman favorites, right? Ashton Jeanty and Dylan Gabriel. And I think Dylan Gabriel, with another strong performance or 2, unfortunately for Ashton Jeanty, might move into the pole position. Now, I say this, and we've talked about this. I think Ashton Jeanty is going to have to benefit from 1 or 2 things. Boise State remains undefeated, and he breaks records in their way to the college football playoff. Or those other guys kind of fall off. Jeanty, while not maybe leading his team to the playoff or breaking records, gets to where he's just the guy. So those 2, and then you got best of the rest, Travis Hunter, and throw me Dylan Sampson in, as mentioned too, for doing what he's doing with Tennessee.
Okay, interesting. They're getting Sampson in there. But speaking of best of the rest, Tyler, it's time to get to the final few games that stood out to us during week 9 of the college football season. And the first one, we talked about it a little bit, that Alabama and Missouri had the potential to get ugly. And then the day after we recorded this, it was announced that Nate Noel wasn't going to play and that it was just going to turn into more than likely a downhill slide for Missouri. And that's exactly what it turned into. Brady Cook gets injured in the first half, his hand injury there. And Alabama went from a defensive dominating performance of 6-0, but you never kind of felt that Alabama was going to truly be in danger once they got a touchdown. They finally did go up 13-0 heading into halftime. Enter Drew Pine and a whole lot of Missouri turnovers. 3 picks thrown by Pine. Those were all 3 of Missouri's turnovers on the day. And Alabama cruises to victory 34-0, but Tyler, you pointed it out last week. If Alabama did this and Missouri kind of dinged up as they are, this may not mean anything for Alabama. I think it's good that they went out there. I kind of see it as Alabama played a team with kind of a pulse, not 100%, but they weren't dead either. And they came out and just beat them up. And that's what you want to see from Alabama, given the circumstances against a weakened opponent. You pin them while they're down, you shut them out. It was a good day for Alabama, but with everything else going on, kind of gets lost in the shuffle.
It does. And, it's one of those deals where where Bama was kind of expected to do this, especially once Cook suffered his injury. And so they took care of business on that front, ran all over Missouri, right? Uh, Once they got that grind game going. So that's big. But yeah, it's one of those games where for Bama, it's not going to come up, I think, in the conversation for their resume to try to get in the college football playoff. I think that's the unfortunate part here if you are the Crimson Tide.
Absolutely. And for Missouri, the more kind of interesting storyline from this comes from Missouri of they're still ranked technically. A lot of people upset that Missouri's still number 25 and didn't get booted out. But I mean, it was one of those. A lot of people said, "Hey, Vandy was only 3 points behind Missouri this week. Why not just keep them in?" And then the other story for Missouri is how banged up are they really? You're going to have a bye week, then you'll get Oklahoma after that at home. That'll be a big game for Missouri there. Just, first time you played Oklahoma in a while. But how healthy is Missouri going to be? What's Brady Cook's timeline? What's Nate Noel's timeline? What are all these factors that are going to go into it? Because, Tyler, if they're somehow not back for that Oklahoma game, we might be looking at 1st to 10 wins. It might be that ugly type of game.
Yeah, it might be a little Big Ten in the SEC, huh?
It very well could be. And then for Alabama, kind of the opposite scenario with LSU losing to Texas A&M, Alabama, LSU in a few weeks. That almost sets up, in most people's minds, granted, we'll have to talk about a scenario where maybe a 3-loss team can get into the playoff at some point. But a lot of people are viewing that game in a few weeks between Bama and LSU as that's a playoff elimination game now. So how will Alabama continue to kind of carry over from this game, take those positives away, and continue to bring it on the rest of the season?
Exactly. And that's probably the message that Coach DeBoer's got sent to his team that, hey, you're still in this hunt, right? Even with the 2 losses, there's some games upcoming for some teams ahead of you that could potentially, I should say, make things a little murkier, in terms of the conference picture and give you a better case. So that will be the big storyline from this game is how does Alabama carry it going forward?
Absolutely. The next one to get to, though, Tyler, a red team with a different result, 31-17, Indiana 8-0, and doing it with a backup quarterback. I mean, you put Jackson in. This was the big story. How would Indiana respond with Taven Jackson in? And Indiana looked perfectly fine. They were able to run the ball well. They were able to play great defense, had the big pick six that everybody's seen that just, everyone was talking about. I saw on Twitter the camera shot. Everyone loved pulling back, seeing a rocking crowd in Bloomington for this one. Had game day there, had all this hype going on, and Indiana not cruising, so to speak, but still a 31-17 win over Washington. Big win there for Indiana.
Yeah, and it sounds like Curtis Rourke could be back in time for that big contest against Ohio State coming up in a few weeks. Sounds like he might be back for the Michigan State game. So just in that sense, no harm, no foul. Backup comes in, gets it done.
Yeah, and I mean, it was
as
just
needed, right? Doesn't lose them the game. And for Indiana, chance to just cruise, as I was going to say, the next 2 weeks against Michigan State. That's kind of a wild thing to say.
It is.
Where we're at right now.
But I mean, also credit, because we always joke about it. Big Ten ball, Justice Ellison. Here comes Justice with 29 carries for 123 to touchdown. That's classic Big Ten ball. That's what happens when you have a backup quarterback, though. You have to rely on your run game. And you had 3.6 yards a carry. Doesn't sound that great, but when your defense plays well, you're going to feel a lot better about doing that.
It equates to controlling the clock, controlling the game, right? Especially when you got the defense doing what they did.
It does. And we got one more Big Ten game to get to, Penn State and Wisconsin. It was an upset advisory for a reason. It felt like it for a moment, Tyler. It could have been one of those games where, okay, Wisconsin's got a 10-7 lead at halftime. You're feeling the momentum. Drew Aller, unfortunately for him, gets injured in this game. All the ingredients started to come into place. And then Jalen Greed gets a 19-yard pick six midway through the third quarter. And that changes things back. Wisconsin was able to answer with a field goal. And it's a 1-point game going into the fourth. But Penn State just grinds this thing out. I mean, look at the drives here. 7:35 and 5:15 on the two scoring drives for Penn State. They switched things up, had to, a quarterback with the Aller injury. And you get to bring in Bo Pribula, who he played solid, Tyler. I mean, this is one that you could look and, Aller was still the leading passer for Penn State. But Pribula, I thought he played, as well as you could in a situation. You get dropped into that as ESPN decides it wants to not load on my end. Shout out to my computer dying for some reason. That's very fun. But either way, Penn State able to come in and really control the fourth quarter, which felt unexpected considering how the other three quarters of the game had gone. Now ESPN finally loads. And Pribula, 11 for 13, 98 yards, a touchdown. He played fine.
Yeah, and that's a credit to him for, staying ready, because in a situation where you're the de facto number 2, that's hard to do. Come off the bench cold and just have a great performance, right, to help win the game for your team. And a big credit to the Penn State defense. You really shut down Tyree Walker there. We were kind of interested to see if Tyree could do anything in that one, and boy, held him to pretty much nothing throughout the day. He did have a touchdown, but man, it was a struggle for Tyree to be able to get any yards in that one.
Yeah, 2.7 yards a carry for Tyree Walker, only 59 yards on 22 touches. Not a great day for him whatsoever. But we talked about, like you mentioned, that's what Penn State's defense can do to people. They weren't sleepwalking per se going into this one like we talked about with Ohio State. Maybe had that issue a little bit to get with Nebraska. Penn State, it was more just the quarterback issue. Going to be interesting to see what Penn State does. If Aller plays, if he doesn't, it's going to be an interesting game plan next week for Penn State, Tyler.
Yeah, if you're a Penn State fan, you got to feel like no matter who starts a quarterback, whether you get Aller back or not, you probably still have a pretty good chance in that Ohio State game just because you know what your defense is about and your run game has been really consistent.
Absolutely. In the final game to get to, the Sunflower Showdown, a game that for the past few years, Kansas State can win it by a lot. They can win it by a few points, but Kansas State is going to find a way to win, and it happened again, Tyler. 29-27, K-State survives a 2-6 Kansas team that has led every game at some point in the fourth quarter. This was no exception. Kansas had the lead until the final 2 minutes of the game. Chris Tennant, 51-yard field goal. I mean, you talk about a kid that they'd come in talking about, that was his career long, and he comes through. Could have had the distance to nearly make it from 60 if he wanted to. K-State, Kansas, a lot of people think of it as a basketball rivalry. It gets pretty intense in football as well when both teams are competitive or one's really looking to knock the other off like we saw here. At K-State, just a quality win. Avoided the Big 12 nightmare scenario if you're everyone else of, this thing might nearly be locked up already outside of Colorado trying to peek in. K-State, much needed to stay in that Big 12 title race.
Yeah, it was. And poor Kansas. If you're a Jayhawk fan, you think your program's on the up and up coming into this year, right? You got the revitalization, and now you're back to the same old Kansas grasping defeat from the clutches of victory. Oh man, what a tough day to be a Jayhawk fan. But Kansas State, not pretty, but you get it done. Probably should have lost the game, but doesn't matter at the end of the season when we're tallying up wins and losses.
Absolutely, make it 16 straight wins now for K-State over Kansas. Mark Mangino was the coach last time Kansas beat Kansas State. I'm pouring it on at this point, but just a rough year for the Jayhawks at Kansas State. Like you said, credit to them. Avery Johnson, able to do enough in this game. 19 for 34, not the best ratio there to have, but 253 and 2 touchdowns. You'll take that. 67 yards on the ground, a TD there as well. Kansas State, just good enough to win. But in a rivalry game like that, sometimes just good enough will get the job done. But Tyler, that wraps up another week of college football. Week 9 officially in the books. Another fun one as always. So folks, feel free to like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell to always know when new episodes come out, and leave a comment down below. It doesn't seem like a lot to do those things, and it really isn't. It only takes a few minutes of your day at most, but it does mean a lot to us. We're at over 90 subscribers now. If we can get to 100 by the end of November, at least before the end of 2024 itself, that would be fantastic. We would sincerely appreciate your support.
Absolutely. And of course, just if you tune in at all, rather regardless, comment or like, subscription. We appreciate it. Hope you got something from it.
Absolutely. But folks, until next time, have a good one, everybody.